Our chair and leader, Harry Carver's not here today. He's on, I think, vacation. So I'm pinch hitting for him. I'm Barbara Hadley Smith. And this is a very important topic tonight, these ballot amendments. And this program will be taped and will be shown. So we hope that we get this information out to a lot of people. And if you'll just, I'll wait till everybody gets a seat. We're going to go number 1 and number 2. And to speak on number 1 is Tipton Moody, who is with the League of Women Voters Voting Rights Restoration Project. So I will let him go ahead and start. Tip?
Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah.
Is this on? Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, put it a little closer to you. I think if as long as it's got the green light on, it's on.
Okay, how's that? Okay. Yes, I am a member of the Kentucky League of Women Voters, along with Deb Grainer. I've been working on the Voting Rights Restoration Committee for like the past 4 years. Also a member of the Kentucky Council of Churches Justice and Advocacy Commission and the United Methodist Church Advocacy Team. So, inasmuch as I am a member of those 3 organizations, I am not here as a representative for any of them. I want to make that very clear, okay? I am here as an independent advocate against Amendment 1. And just so y'all know, with full transparency, I am a convicted felon. My voting rights have been restored, and I have been incarcerated, okay? And I think it's a misnomer to say that I'm here to speak on Amendment 1 because I'm certain that y'all know just as much about it as I do. So I think it's probably a better use of our time, if y'all don't object, to use this as a conversation among ourselves. I can give you my impressions of it. It's a redundant amendment. It's already illegal for a non-citizen to vote in the Commonwealth of Kentucky at the local, state, or federal level. And I think that this was just a push by our rural senators. I'm choosing my words carefully, okay? It's indicative of, one, them following a leader, national groups who have put similar legislation before other states, and a backlash against the border crisis. And it's really more indicative of a xenophobia and a rising surge in the extremist positions of the Republican Party. And in full transparency, I do remain a registered Republican. But I think that this is just our crazy legislators who have created a solution without a problem. Now, what I find really, really aggravating about this is if you look at the amendment, if you go to Franklin County's county clerk's website and you pull up what your ballot is going to look like, you will have a little bit of text at the top, and then you will see the text of Section 145 of our Constitution. And then you'll see a little snippet of Section 155 from our Constitution. Now, the really important part of this amendment is not what it says in Section 145, although that creates additional problems of another type. But Section 155 actually says that these non-citizens cannot vote in certain elections. And we have, I think, 5 municipalities across the country who have allowed non-citizens to vote in their municipal elections. Not at the state level, not at the federal level. But these city governments have decided that, it doesn't matter whether you're a citizen. You are here, you're working, you pay taxes, your heads are counted in our, census. So yes, you deserve to have a say in the government that affects you where you live. And our legislature says, nope, that's not gonna happen in Kentucky. Well, if it were to happen in Kentucky, where would it happen? Fayette and Jefferson. Boone, Kenton, and Campbell wouldn't do it. And, does Franklin County have a large migrant population or non-citizen population that this would have any kind of a direct impact on elections? So I think it's just really a comment on our legislature's view of other people. They want to keep the elections secure with a certain demographic, and they want to be certain that people in their rural districts are aware of that. Because not a single senator is from an urban area. I looked them up. They're from what we might call population centers, but they are rural population centers. Jason Howell, he's from Murray. How many people have ever been to Murray? Okay. Let's see, Robbie Mills, he's from Owensboro or Paducah or someplace. My state senator, Donald Douglas, yes, he does represent Josephine County and part of Fayette. So he's one, but I'll shut up now. But they are mostly from rural areas. So I think we have to look at this in total context of what they're trying to achieve. What are these legislators saying? What is the political statement they are making to the people of the Commonwealth, and especially the people where they live? What I was saying about the way the constitutional amendment appears on the ballot, nowhere in the text of Section 145 or Section 155 does it show you the actual change in language. So I made a copy of the underlying Senate bill that does actually show the changes in the text. But, when you look at, you don't know. And I think that, I'm hoping that if this does pass by some reason, that there will be people or organizations who will pursue the course of action similar to what happened after Marcy's Law was passed the first time. Take it to the Supreme Court saying there is no way that this was appropriate to be presented to the people of the Commonwealth. It's confusing. No one can make sense of it. We want it to be done over. And I've heard a lot of people say that, well, Senator Howell, I think, said that he wanted to make sure that we had faith and confidence in our election security. Now, Michael Adams has said, there ain't nothing wrong with our election security. You're a moron. But nonetheless, it passed out of the Senate like 31 to 4, some amazing number. But as a convicted felon, Section 45 deals with felony disenfranchisement. And our concern is that people will look at this and they will think, oh, wow, this is something new. How many of you know what Section 145 is? How many of you know about felony disenfranchisement in the Commonwealth? Okay. So you think, I'm fearful that voters will look at this and say, oh, well, people with felonies can't vote. Well, we can't, already we can't vote. And even if this fails, which we all hope it does, I'm thinking, all of the work that we have done to get felony disenfranchisement on the ballot, if we have 3 or even 4 constitutional amendments that have failed in 2 consecutive election cycles, what kind of an appetite do you think that our dear sweet legislators are going to have to put something else on the ballot next cycle, especially when it concerns the same section of our Constitution? So I think that this has the potential to have long-term impact on voting rights restoration in Kentucky. So those are my thoughts.
On your point of felon disenfranchisement, during the Pride Parade, I went down. the Libertarian-
Jeff, you want to come up here so everybody can hear you? Do you mind?
But this is just once.
Okay. You can ask several questions then.
Hello. My name is Jeffrey Laird, and I have the esteemed position of being a coordinator in this organization. To the gentleman's point on felon disenfranchisement, at the Pride Parade, the Libertarians had a tent up, and I don't know if you're familiar with libertarian ideology. They are on the right, but they also have certain issues that are shared with democratic socialists. There's room there. And they are against, surprising to me, against Amendment 1 precisely for that reason, that a felony, once time served, should not be a lifetime sentence. That's wrong. That once your time has been served, you should get the vote back. And I just wanted to mention that because normally I don't agree much with libertarian standpoint, but I thought it was a rational point to make. My problem with Amendment 1, basically, as the gentleman mentioned, it's a non-issue. I did a little bit of research. While no state allows non-citizens to vote in federal or statewide elections, 16 U.S. jurisdictions permit non-citizens to vote in certain local elections, such as for school board, city council, or mayor. Yet, relatively small numbers of those non-citizens choose to vote these local elections. These are people from Canada with green cards working in tech industries. They got married, they had kids, and now they want to vote for school board. So what? The jurisdictions break out as 11 in Maryland, 3 in Vermont, the city of San Francisco, and the District of Columbia, total of 16. In the most recent census of governments, which was conducted in 2022, the Census Bureau counted 90,837 governments within the United States, the district and its 6 territories. In addition to the federal government, 50 state governments, the government of Washington, D.C., there were 3,031 county governments, 35,705 township and municipal governments, 12,546 independent school districts, and 39,555 other special purpose local governments. Of these, 16 allow non-citizens to vote in local elections. If you run the percentage, it's 0.00018% of governmental entities in the nation allow non-citizens to vote. It is a profoundly non-issue. That said,
That research.
I did it over coffee in the morning. It's my best time to think, actually, if I haven't had too much bourbon the night before. Okay, the first point I get, okay, and that's we just discussed that, shouldn't be a life sentence. 2, persons who at the time of the election are in confinement under the judgment of a court for some penal offense, but not convicted,
No.
they're just confined?
If you are confined pre-conviction if you are confined on any charge pre-trial,
Right.
you can vote while incarcerated.
You can.
You can,
Okay.
right. But we did registration in Fayette County, and there were 3 men who were eligible to register. But their court date was between the registration deadline
Mm-hmm.
and election day. So to protect them and to protect us, we were not able to turn in their registrations in case they were convicted between
Right.
registration deadline and election day.
But this says the following persons shall not have the right to vote. Persons who at the time of the election are in confinement.
Jeff, that's part of the law right now. It's part of the 145 right now.
Okay,
I'm looking at it, and the only thing that I'm seeing that they're changing is they're adding the sentence, no person who is a citizen of the U.S. who is not a citizen of the U.S. shall be allowed to vote in this state. The other, the idiots and sane persons in 3,
oh, we'll get there.
the people in confinement under 2.
Right.
And convictions under number 1, that's already in amendment.
Okay.
In section 145.
Okay, this is English. I hope I understand it, but bear me out. The following persons shall not have the right to vote. If I get pulled over on a DUI and I can't afford to make bail and I'm incarcerated waiting for my trial to come up, can I vote?
Are you registered?
Yeah,
Yes, you can vote absentee.
but that's not what this says.
Confinement means incarcerated.
Right,
I'm trying.
but it doesn't mean convicted.
Yes, it
No.
does.
If I can't make bail, I'm in jail. I
Right.
can't get out. But
Right.
I've not been convicted of anything.
Right, you can still vote while you're incarcerated. But if you have been convicted, that's when you lose your right to vote for the rest of your life.
Okay, I still
On a
don't see.
felony, but not a
Am I
misdemeanor.
alone here? Am I missing something in section, in point number 2?
I think it's confusing.
It's certainly vague.
Men?
Okay.
Law that has been agreed how they're gonna handle it, and it's not what the words say.
Okay,
And see,
Jeff, this is what I was talking about, I asked Judge Goodwine about that on Saturday.
yeah,
And she said the phrase under judgment means convicted.
okay,
That's what she said.
okay. And then point 3, idiots and insane persons. Okay, insane persons I get. An insane person is defined as one who does not know the difference between right and wrong and is therefore not responsible for their actions. They are not persons. Idiots, they don't even use that language anymore in most medical or legal documents. It goes back to a time before they delineated between mild, moderate, severe, and profound intellectual disability. It is possible for me to be mildly retarded and yet be my own guardian and not subject to the legal disabilities of not being able to marry or vote. But that is not stated here. Again, it's vague, and my problem with vague is that it can be over-enforced or under-enforced at the whim of those with the power to enforce. And that's all I have to
and I
say.
think, Jeff, this is, you have brought up something very important, because the points that you have just brought up are already in our Constitution. Right, so if you think that this is something new or different, you would be mistaken. Because this language was written in 1891, August of 1891, so it was 133 years ago, just a couple of months ago. Now, you know who was president in 1891? Benjamin Harrison. Men wore collars that were 3 inches high. Gibson girls were just becoming popular. So the language in this section hasn't been changed in 133 years until now. And you bring up a very good point. People are going to think this is something new and scratch their heads and it's like, but
Yeah, but the guys that put this forward were trying to get votes from a certain section of the population that is worried about immigrants voting, immigrants doing anything. And they were just trying to get votes.
It's an appeal to
It's
fear.
my opinion.
absolutely it's an appeal to fear. They were, okay, let me choose my words again. They were touting Trumpist talking points and political issues. And, you know, the thing I would like for y'all to discuss with your legislators after Election Day, because you will have a new state rep, how many of our state legislators will vote for Donald Trump, a man who has 34 felony convictions, who is a resident of Florida, but according to Florida law can still vote for himself because his conviction was in New York, and Florida's law is dictated by the law of the convicting state. At the same time, they will not change our 133-year-old constitutional section to allow someone like me or Deb to not suffer lifetime disenfranchisement.
Now, you've had your rights restored.
Yes, ma'am.
Correctly? Deb's had her rights restored.
Deb has been expunged.
Expunged. How, what percentage of felons, do you have any idea at this point, you have been successful in getting their records changed to where they're allowed to vote in this effort to restore votes?
Well, the number that I saw last year from the governor's office was that there were 188,000 Kentuckians who were eligible to have their voting rights restored. The last number that I had from DOC, there are still 162,000 of us ineligible to regain our voting rights. I have open records requests out, so I'm hopeful that those numbers will improve, but I'm not confident that will happen.
Are there other
We don't really
questions?
know how many folks through KFTC have been reached.
Yeah.
But the democracy champions and the event canvassers this year really got out, and they registered over 1,000 people, and a lot of them were people with felonies in their past.
So
they're doing
they will show up in the future, yeah.
But see, there's no way our agencies don't talk to each other. You know, DOC, they have a database. They know who's eligible, but you don't know until you go to the website or call Heather. So it would be really helpful if they would take their website, their database of eligible voters, send it to the State Board of Elections. And when someone registers, the State Board of Elections can flip, make a little tag, a flag, do something so that we can keep track of how many people who have had their voting rights restored and who have actually registered to vote. And then one step further, we can go and track them and see when they vote. But we cannot do that. And there's...
Once rights are restored, are they restored permanently, or can the next governor, like Devin, reverse what the previous governor did?
No. Once your voting rights are restored, they are restored permanently.
So
Now,
when Devin took his actions, that only applied to people convicted during his term?
yes, it was proactive, not retroactive.
Are there other questions, comments? Dawn?
I just wondered, in the amendment, it just lumps immigrants into one big, word. And is there any chance of further legislation or whatever differentiating between those that are documented and those that are not? Because your example of the IT workers in northern Kentucky, and I have a bias, my son-in-law is an immigrant, but it's like he's paying his taxes just like you and I are. And to me, there should be a difference between those that are documented, that have green cards, that have social security cards, that, are living and working and on the way towards citizenship, and those that are not.
This doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're here legally or illegally. The wording is non-citizens.
It would take another constitutional amendment to change
change
that.
stuff. Yeah.
Yep.
Lyda?
KFTC's been working on voting rights restoration for over 20 years now. And the league's been doing it also for a long time to.
I heard
to get-
Rand Paul testify on this one time in a surprising way, where he favored restoration. Is he still, do you know whether
Not,
he's still?
not currently, no, I don't.
Who?
Rand Paul, what his position
That was
on
a joke, y'all.
restoration.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a joke.
I vaguely remember that, though.
But see, interestingly enough, this should be a libertarian talking point. You know, disenfranchisement should not be part of their political platform because it really does go against, at least what I remember traditional libertarian philosophy
Well, it
being.
is. They believe that disenfranchisement for life is wrong. The
Right.
libertarians I talked to, I mean, that was, they represent the party. That's the guy that runs for everything every year. I talked to him for about 45 minutes. And as far as Rand Paul is concerned, they don't really want to talk about that. Because, I mean, anyone who's familiar with the ideology is, his father was a libertarian.
Mhm.
He is not. He is a pick and choose libertarian, if he's any libertarian at all.
He's an opportunist.
Absolutely.
And see, you know, there once upon a time when I was younger, I considered myself a libertarian. And I would say, you know, we have a problem with drugs. Well, we're not going to fight a war. Let's just do what smart people do. We will say, okay, recreational drugs will be legal. They will be regulated. We will create a brand new, huge revenue stream from this. We will keep it safe, and we'll be moving on. Just like the brothels in Nevada. You know, doctors go and check out the ladies on a regular basis.
And libertarians are pro-choice.
Lyda, you had a question?
You mentioned that the sponsors of this are all rural
Mhm.
senators?
Well, Max Wise, if you call Campbellsville non-rural, but it's in the middle of nowhere, who has the Senate bill copy? Yeah. Oh, I've got, sorry, I've got it right here, Lyda. Howell, Boswell, Deneen, Douglas, Elkins, well, Mount Sterling, I guess we can consider a population center. Robbie Mills, Brandon Storm, which is really surprising. Philip Wheeler from Pikeville, Steve Wilson, Max Wise, and Jared Yates. And Jared Yates represents the rural parts of Fayette County and northern Madison County.
So Storm's part of this,
The Storm was one of the co-sponsors, yes.
and he,
Yes,
his own voting rights restoration bill
yes.
2 years ago.
No, he had one that was filed this past session.
Well, when you said rural, I thought, who are they targeting here? Are they targeting immigrant labor in rural areas?
No, they're targeting their constituents' hateful fear of non-citizens. You know, the Mexicans who pick the tobacco.
It's an appeal to immigrant hysteria.
It's just
It works for them politically, so they're maximizing it. So.
it's just bias and discrimination at a very immoral level.
So is it fair to say that this Amendment 1 does not really change anything? Because it's all these prohibitions are already in the Constitution. But it is an effort to stir the pot, to make people fear something and get them to turn out to vote. Is that correct?
Yes. Because when you hear Donald Trump talking about, you know, Haitians eating dogs in Ohio, and, you know, you hear your state senator saying, we're not going to have people who aren't Americans voting here, you know, there's a direct line between the two trains of thought. But you're right, it's totally redundant, and it makes clear that they can't vote in local or municipal elections.
Are there any other comments? Thank you very much, Tip.
Absolutely.
I appreciate
Thank you.
this.
I think Jeff brought the most useful information. Because see, I thought it was
My habit of doing that.
I thought it was 5. Now I can go back tomorrow and say it's 16.
Yeah,
It's
the
awesome.
source is the Federal Bank of St. Louis, whatever the.
All right, I think Tip may have to slip out because he has an obligation this evening.
I have here some talking points on voting rights restoration. Deb has put up some door hangers for vote no on Amendment 1. And there are also, some half sheets on civil rights restoration talking points that is culled from this, but it's in a much more portable format.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, y'all.
Appreciate it. Okay.
And when January gets here, please talk to your legislator. Tell them that you want to end felony disenfranchisement in the Commonwealth. Okay? Because it
Yes.
starts here.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
y'all.
Really appreciate it. Addressing Amendment 2 is Whitney Allison, whom I sometimes mistakenly refer to as Whitney Houston. I announced that we had Whitney Houston speaking on this, and everybody was a little disconcerted. Whitney Allison is the Director of Student Services, right, in Franklin County Schools. And so she's got a broad swath of responsibility. And I think it's going to have a slideshow, too. So, Whitney, thank you for coming.
Sure. So as the Director of Student Services, I deal with, well, let me start over. I've been in education for 24 years. This is my 25th year. 23 of those years I spent in middle school. And here recently have switched to the Director of Student Services. It's a title that's just changed. Many of you probably recognize the title of DPP, or Director of Pupil Personnel. So my job responsibilities are to get children to school, and then make sure they are supported. So I oversee our youth service coordinators, some of our social workers, basically anything that does not directly impact them in the classroom, you can count probably comes out of student services. So we'll talk a little bit about, from my perspective, Amendment 2. And again, this is just information from what I know in my position as Director of Student Services. In no way do I want to personally influence your vote one way or the other. I just want to educate from my perspective. So Amendment 2, in terms of the change, ultimately the words in yellow are what pop out to me, and that is the fact that it is financial support. We're changing where the state funds go for education. So on your ballot, what you'll see is to give parents a choice. The amendment is in favor of enabling the General Assembly to fund education centers beyond the common school, which in essence is public education. So if you take a look at both sides of the issues, you'll hear folks who are saying vote yes, who believe that this is going to provide teacher raises, empower parents for school choice, and uplift students in low income or poverty areas. On the no side, 11% raise. Governor Beshear advocated for that last session. That did not pass. So in the middle, my question is, if you didn't pass the raise, how can you guarantee that changing the funding is going to advocate? That's just a question I have. They can vote for anything they want to vote for, right? School choice already exists, and that's something that has occurred. Somebody's going to fact check me and check dates, so I'm not going to give you a date, but let's say in the last 5 years, okay? The border laws for the state of Kentucky are different. So if you are willing to transport your child, you can take them to any school you want to take them to. So every summer, I get a plethora of what we call out-of-district forms, where no matter where you live in this community, if you want to, if you live on one side of town, you want to go to school on the other side of town, as long as there's staffing there, then we don't have a problem with it. It is October the 18th today, 17th today. I have not turned down an out-of-district form yet in our middle and high schools. We have one kindergarten at one elementary that is way overflooded. And so we can't accept out-of-district in that one kindergarten realm. But as you can imagine, it doesn't happen very often. If you want to go to school and you want to transport yourself, you can do that. And that includes beyond Franklin County. We have families who work at the state government offices. They bring their children with them to Franklin County, and that's okay. You can do that if you choose to do that. So again, school choice is something that kind of exists already, not from the realm of private to public. So we'll come back to that. And then finally, with uplifting, students with disabilities could lose services. The proponents of no are suggesting. And one of the reasons when we talk about funding, my perspective is we have to play by the same rules. So if you're going to share funding across different entities, are we playing by the same guidelines and expectations? So, for example, when we talk about school choice, it does already exist. If I am naturally from Nicholas County, Carlisle, Kentucky, my population of 5,000. There's no private school there. If my parents wanted to take me to a school choice or a private entity, the nearest one would have been Lexington. My parents would have had to driven an hour to drop me off and driven an hour back to Carlisle if that's where we wanted to go. So again, there's a significant amount of the rural population that this amendment doesn't address. 52% of our private schools are in Jefferson, Fayette, and Kenton. Now, Franklin County does have some private schools here, so I guess you could say we're part of the 48, but the majority of those private entities are in our larger cities.
So if you live in the Frankfort Independent School District and want to go to Western Hills, say,
Yes.
do you have to pay tuition?
No, ma'am.
So because back in the day, you had to pay tuition.
That's right.
Okay.
There's no such thing as tuition anymore. You could just call my office and say I want to go to Franklin County Schools, and as long as the only caveat is transportation, and that is also a funding issue, which we can get into at some point. But you could call in tuition free. You can go to that school. Point two, talking about IDEA, and that's when we get into our students with disabilities. Right now, it really depends on the private entity whether or not they accept students with disabilities. They don't have to. So the school system, because we receive federal funding, because we receive state funding, we must accept all children. At a private entity, that entity can decide whether they have the staffing to support a student with disabilities or not. Thirdly, and this, I'm an old social studies teacher, but if you look at the democratic principle of separation between church and state, I think this brings up conversations about curriculum and what does it look like in our parochial schools. I think we have a great one here in our community. TFCA is a fantastic partner, and I think there is a place for private schools, so please don't anybody hear me say that there's not a place for those systems. The question is, what does the curriculum look like? Is the game the same? For example, I think if you compare academically apples and oranges, I don't know that any of our private schools take the same state assessment. So it's hard to say that the academic outcome is different because we're not measuring it the same way. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, TFCA, the Frankfort Christian Academy. And again, I think they're great people, wonderful educators. I love partnering with them, and I'm glad they're in this community. And quite frankly, I believe that Franklin County has an outstanding education system, both private and public, and it's great that families have that opportunity to choose. And then so finally, funding, and this is just speaking from Franklin County Schools' perspective. In 2010, 56% of our funding came from the state, and 44% came from our local tax dollars. Fast forward 14 years later, and those numbers have traded. So unfortunately, for us to invest in some of the initiatives and things that we're doing that we know are helping our children, that's coming on the backs of our local taxpayers. And we know it's hard when we have to come ask for more. Yes, sir.
Do you go back to 1990? Do you know what the percentage would have been when the Kira lawsuit was filed?
Not off the top of my head, but I can tell you at that time, I was working in Woodford County. And when the Kara lawsuit was passed, Woodford County's tax bracket was one of the higher ones in the state. And so $5 million was leaving from Versailles to balance the funding across the state. And that would have been closer to the probably a 65% state funded at the time. But don't quote me.
Is the trend line that's going to take us back to the condition
Pre-Seek.
pre-Kira?
Yes. So historically, in the 90s, when Seek funding, which is how we get our funding from the state, changed, there was a lawsuit that went through that balanced the funding so that all of the state dollars came to Frankfort, if you will, and then that dollar figure was balanced across all 126 counties of Kentucky. So it didn't matter where you lived in Kentucky. You should use your per pupil amount, which for the fun of it right now is roughly $4,000. Again, I didn't have the figure directly in front of me, but a ballpark, it's roughly $4,000 per child that would come your way.
Another question, if you live in Louisville, you work in Frankfort, and you bring your child to go to school, where do your tax dollars go? I mean, do you pay to help support Frankfort schools? Or do your tax dollars stay in Louisville?
So because of the 1990 Seek funding kind of balancing act, the funding follows the child. But as the worker, your taxes pay both places. And so I'm going to speak to my own personal experience. I lived in Frankfort and I worked in Fayette. So I had to pay local taxes that were tied to my house. But then I had to pay working tax compensate for my job in Frankfort or in Fayette County. But 1990, the Seek funds allowed for that money to follow the child. So wherever they enroll is where that money should go, or that's what it says right now, should go. So here's the analogy that I like to use, as the good Southern folks that we are. You've created a dinner table and you invited these 7 people to come over and the doorbell rings. The meal is on the table. And the 4, 5, 10, 15, 20, we don't know who, right? People that are at the door are going to come to the table. You don't have time to make more food. So the satisfaction level with which everybody walks away is going to be very different because the pie doesn't change. I don't foresee with an amendment change that the amount of funding that exists for education is going to change. So just the hands at the table reaching out for a piece of the pie may multiply. And so you're at potentially doing less with more, and in Franklin County that certainly would be what we had. I was just playing around with more analogies, but it's kind of like, you've got the public library that we support, right? Do you want to be able to go and check out a book from Poor Richards and expect the state to take care of that too? There's a difference between the private and the public sector. So locally, here's what happens, and this flyer exists up here if you want to take it with you. And this is a comparison to the Florida voucher system that came out. But what it would mean locally for Franklin County schools is that we could face a $10 million deficit in our budget. And so on the right side, what I wanted to include are things that we have recently added to our school system to support our teachers and students. And kind of, I don't want to say in order because I'm not the superintendent, but these are the things that we have added recently that have been benefits that we could no longer fund if $10 million was taken out of the funding piece. So central office personnel, we say that's always the first people to go. State law only says you have to have a DPP and a superintendent. So all the other people that support and do some of the work don't have to be there. We would make cuts there. We employ a sheriff in every school. And I can tell you from the kids' perspective, at that time when we added an SRO, I was a principal, and the kids said they felt safer because there was a police officer in the school. So we would hate to see that initiative go. We currently employ behavior interventionists at each school, which help with social skills, acclimation, being a part of a group and a teammate. Again, from my perspective, there's a book called The Anxious Generation by John Haidt. And John is talking about the effects of the information age and technology and how cell phones have affected the way that we communicate with one another. Our kids don't do this anymore. They don't do a lot of face-to-face. It's all behind a screen, and how that has changed things. So we're seeing different behaviors that happen, that we don't know how to talk to one another and apologize or say I'm sorry or fix it or disagree respectfully, because we don't necessarily have to, and I'm not blaming all that on the cell phone, but it is an outcome that we see every day. We have social workers in every one of our schools that are there to support our families and our kids as they navigate whatever life throws their direction. And then even if you let all those things go, we still don't get to the $10 million piece, and we're probably going to have to look at adjusting class sizes. And so your student and teacher ratio changes. If it were to happen in Franklin County. Yes, sir.
I started high school in '68. What is, I don't have kids.
You're okay. You're fine.
What is the average class size high school? No.
I'm going to say most of them are probably 1 to 30, 1 to 29.
What's the cap now? Used to be 31.
There's really a cap in elementary, not in middle and high.
Well, when I taught at Franklin County, I thought it was 31.
Mm-hmm.
But that was 30 years ago.
Yes. So they've tried to hover right there. And there's arguments on both sides about whether class size matters or whether it doesn't. What I would articulate is it's just like parenting. Your attention is split by 15 or 30 or 45. Your attention to detail is split. And so that's hard. That's hard. I mean, that's changes in even our university level, whether students go to a large college or a small college. I mean, the attention of that teacher is split by the number of kids that are in that room.
We had 40 in my.
And I if I honestly, I'd have to pull up stats and share with you, but I can't say that there's not a class that might have 40 in it. But we try to stay below 30. 27 is the magic number, I think. But we try to keep those class sizes as low as we can.
What is the ideal in elementary, middle, and high? What is the ideal number in a classroom?
Oh, that's hard to answer, honestly. Because it's really based on the makeup of the class. So you can have a class of 35 kids that are super compliant and focused on school and want to do exactly what you want them to do. And that seems very doable. You could have a class with 3 young people that have a hard time adjusting to group dynamics because let's pretend they're an only child at home. So socialization is difficult because they're not used to sharing. And that changes the dynamic of that room. So I don't know that there's a magic number. It's more of a magic chemistry. And again, that's why I say I think there is a place for private and public and lots of entities. But as a public school employee, I can just share that I know that the funding is going to change what we are able to offer.
Can I ask, for private schools?
Yes.
It's obviously secular ones, but it's also religious private schools.
Does any go to, homeschooling? Not that I am aware of. Now, I will say that we have a contingency of folks that are interested in what is now called the Kentucky Virtual Academy, Kentucky Virtual Learning, and that is a public, independent district, Cloverport, Kentucky. That's a very small place, okay, but it's a very small, independent district, like Frankfort Independent would be. And they have created a virtual learning academy that some of our students choose to attend because they can do it through the computer. And that is an option. And if they choose to join that community, then their funding goes to that school district. But that was one way that public school chose to try to stay open in a rural part of Kentucky that was not very big. And I'll have to check my geography on exactly where that school is. But we do have a handful of folks that are using that option.
But there are homeschoolers, school kids in Franklin County, right?
Yes, we have approximately 425 students that are homeschooled. Now, homeschool is a complex issue when you get into that. It used to be that you had to show your curriculum, that you had to meet with the DPP and provide reports. It is more of a, we trust you that you're homeschooling. I can check occasionally, but it has also gotten to a point that if I call too many times, then I may be perceived as passing judgment, or I don't like the word harassing, right? But so I can't tell you not to homeschool your child. One thing that we run into in our community with homeschool is if you homeschool K through 8, there are really minimal repercussions when your child reenters the school. But if you homeschool in high school, if you don't use a homeschool option that is accredited by the State Department of Education, then those credits will not transfer in. And we've seen some kids enter in as juniors or seniors hoping to graduate from the high school that had to start over as freshmen. So getting that information out about that there are futuristic ramifications when you choose to homeschool.
Is there any standard for qualifications for a homeschool teacher? Do they have to meet any? No. So there's two different things, right? So there's home hospital, which if a child is dealing with a mental illness or an issue in their family that is making it difficult to attend school and a doctor says you can't come to school, then we employ a homeschool teacher that goes to support that, and they're often teachers. If you come to my office and say, I'm just going to homeschool my child, I may know that you work full-time, but you just sign on the line saying you're going to homeschool your child and that you're responsible for the curriculum. And I don't know what. So you can be a high school dropout yourself that teach your child's teacher.
Yes, you could believe that you want to do that. Yes, sir.
Back on the funding issue, and they claim that this is going to be so good for parents and students in all these different counties. Are they depending on if this passes that the state government is going to make some kind of massive influx of money into education? I mean, what are the plans?
I think that's a great question, and that's the question that a lot of public educators have, because we don't know the plans. We just, I'm going to use the word from earlier from vague. Vaguely, we want you to vote for the ability to send this money wherever, but we haven't told you the rules of the game yet. We haven't told you if you have to be compliant with federal children with disabilities laws. We haven't told you if you have to comply with the state standards for academics, where you have to teach a certain curriculum and you're going to get tested on that curriculum. We don't know that yet. So it's, I don't know, it's kind of a chicken and egg conversation, right? I mean, it's they're asking for the ability to send funding with a lot of questions in the air. Yes, sir.
And it also true that the General Assembly, the GOP is trying to eliminate the income tax, so they're trying to lower the amount of money coming in. So that's got to also have an impact on this issue.
Yes, there's some understanding on my part that we are considering more like tourism taxes than income tax. So when you go to a beachfront condo or Gatlinburg, and there's a different tax on the fact that you're traveling. That there's some consideration in changing the funding source. But I don't. But again, I don't know. I'm not the expert on where the funds come from. I just know that I don't envision that 44% going back to 56% quickly, and to separate that 44% even more. I may not have an answer, but I'll try.
This is just a personal observation, and I may be wrong, but I personally feel that there is a large movement of people that no longer want to pay for children or children to get an education. Is that a thing in our community, where people no longer want to pay for our children to be educated?
I'm going to choose my words wisely. I don't know that it's that folks don't want to pay. I don't know that we value education as we once did. When I think about free and public education and the Constitution, the idea that all kids deserve a chance to learn. And when you compare academic achievement from the United States to other countries, we're often guided to take a look at particular countries. But when we do the comparison, all kids don't go to school in that country. It's only if you want to. I do think there is a value conversation that's worthy of having. The fact that we have over 400 families that have chosen to homeschool in our community, I think speaks to that value. And I'm not, and please don't.
Do homeschool kids, do their families pay taxes that go to public schools?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. If they own property, they pay taxes, and those taxes go to public schools. And please don't hear me say that we don't have some rock stars when it comes to homeschooling. But like all issues, we have some folks that are doing it to avoid education. And I can't speak directly to those numbers. You could make an argument on both sides. But yes, if you own property, your taxes go to the public school system and not to your homeschool. Yes, ma'am.
This may be hard to answer, but you've been in this game for a long time. When did people start becoming so dissatisfied with the public education system? Is there a time when the value of education didn't seem as important to people, and therefore, and we started looking at private schools and all homeschooling? Was there a loss of faith for some reason, or what?
I don't know that I'm the person equipped to answer that question. However, I'm going to go back to Jonathan Haidt's work with the anxious generation. And I'm going to say that his research speaks to that in 2010, it was the introduction of the forward-facing camera on the iPhone. And this is, bear with me, but the forward-facing camera focused ourselves and our young people inward to the individual, and allowed us to kind of disappear into our own little corner of the worlds that we created on a screen. And we no longer had to work together as a community or as a group. And so that's his implication. But some of the things that he talks about forming a community, having a debate, understanding that all people think differently, and that you don't have to be right all the time. There are different perspectives to every initiative. Some of what he outlines in his work, I think I see frequently in our school system. It is much easier in the digital world. If I disagree with you, I can unfriend you. I can block you out of my life. In the digital world, I don't have to talk to you and I don't have to see you. But the reality is, when I grow up and I'm an adult, I do have to work with people in my office that I may not agree 100% with. And we have to get along for the sake of our job. And I think we are in the middle of all of these kind of issues where we are becoming very individualized focused, and the common good is diminishing. And again, I don't have any degree, authority. That was completely my personal opinion. But I don't.
It's very profound. Speaking
Yes.
of personal opinion, this is just, an observation, but you are really exceptional in your field, and I think you're a fantastic person.
Oh, thank you.
Because we were on a panel like a month ago talking about juvenile justice. You're here today. I know you've got another panel. This is your job, and you are out here volunteering. And I'm just kind of like in awe of your ability to, do the work that you do, which I cannot imagine what a workload that you have. So, it just goes to show how much you value children in our community and education. And I'm just curious to know, like, where that comes from. Like,
Well, I appreciate you for saying that. That's outstanding to hear, and I do hope that people see that. That I got into education because I value kids, and I think probably where it comes from, I can attribute it to my family. My parents were educators. My dad was a lifelong educator. He started his world in athletics. And we moved from 3 different counties. I talked about being in Nicholas County. I left a brother in every county. So I had to learn to adapt and to adjust and to understand that our world is not one particular perspective. And so in the position that I have now, I love it because I feel like it's not my job to decide for any individual family or any individual student, or it's my job to educate you on the choices that you have. And I meet with families and we talk about, maybe a private school is the best route. And I know people that work at the private school, and I'll help you and I'll call you and let's see. But maybe public school is the best route. Maybe homeschool is the best route. But it's a personal decision. And I just hope to offer some level of education and perspective so that everybody can make the decision that is theirs to make. But thank you. Yes, ma'am.
What you said about technology, how it's changing kids.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised when I substituted a while, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and in both the school systems here, kids come into the room, they're told to get their laptops, they sit down and they teach themselves on a laptop. The teacher really didn't teach anymore. They're at their desk, they walk around, and I was appalled, frankly, because for one thing, I've taught juniors and seniors in high school who did not have good reading comprehension skills. So how can they teach themselves on a computer?
I understand that. And so when I say we're in the throes of it and we're in the middle of it, there was a shift in education where the adults in your community, the wise folks in your community held the information. And when the internet became available in 2007 is the first Apple iPhone. I keep up with that because that's my oldest child. Anyway, I try to tell her all the time, like, this has not always been around. But it exists, you know, when the ability to put the internet in your pocket and look anything up brought information to our fingertips, it was a beautiful thing if you knew what to do with it. And so educators have had to shift to, let me teach you how to ask good questions. Let me teach you how to fact check your information, because our kids are just flooded with,
But they're losing social skills and interpersonal communication skills.
yes.
And I'm appalled really that Franklin County and city schools all on computer in the classroom.
Well, I will say that some of that may be because it's a substitute perspective, and why I share that is sometimes it's hard to expect a seemingly stranger to walk in a room of 30 kids and get them to do anything together because they view it as, hallelujah, there's a new person, they don't know the routines. But if there's an adaptable program online that the teacher can monitor when they get back, that did you do that? Sometimes that's probably what gets left in the subs plans. But there should be more up and face-to-face teaching, and I would hope that that's what you would see if you just came to visit when a regular classroom teacher was up and going. I think we are finding that one size doesn't fit all, and that you have to adjust, and you have to have the ability to research the information and read about it, but then you also have to discuss it.
Well, I worked for adult ed for 5 years, and I was trainer for the teachers. And what we felt worked best was the hybrid model
Amen.
of teachers up front, teaching, interacting, checking work, the online assignments
Mm-hmm.
to complement that.
Yes.
And all computer, no.
Well, I think we learned from COVID that all computer was not effective because it's just not the same. It's not the same as having somebody that can sit down beside you and work your way through the math problem or process with you the textual evidence that you're pulling out of a language arts piece. It's not the same as interacting with a technological device. And so I think we're trying to find how do you become that hybrid model, because somebody in our life is going to disagree with us. Somebody in our life is going to see things differently. And what do you do when that happens? You know, how do you interact? Right now we take our ball and go home. That's probably not fair. That was generalization, but it happens a lot.
Whitney, is there any benefit to this thing passing?
Are you asking Whitney, or are you asking the Director of Student Services? I'm going to say, as the Director of Student Services, it's going to lower funding for Franklin County Schools and change the way we do business. As a personal citizen in our community that works and lives in this every day, I don't see a benefit that is outlined for the good of the whole.
Okay,
Because you're asking us to do more with less.
yeah, I got an email from Rand Paul, and then I read something in the newspaper. Supposedly, teacher the teacher pay will go up if we do this. And there was one, what was the other?
It
It
is.
didn't in Arizona and it didn't in Florida.
And, oh, yeah, the test results will go up.
Well, so right now, teacher pay is the decision and the responsibility of your local Board of Education. So they decide. So, you know, the chunk of money comes to your district. They decide how to spend that money. They could give it back to your teachers, and teacher pay could go up. But they also could spend it on anything else they wanted to. Buildings, operation, parking lots, books. Just being transparent. That's what I mean by, like, there's more questions than answers with the funding. And are you going to have to play by those rules? I don't know how you're going to. I don't know how you're going to spend the funding. There's not an outline that I have found in the amendment that says this is what you're spending the money on.
Well, the other thing was, does anybody know if test scores went up? Which was another point.
They stayed virtually the same. In the four areas that were in the article I read, they're only 1 or 2 percentage points higher or lower. There's no way you can draw a conclusion that it's better or worse. It's the same.
And isn't it true there would be no accountability over these funds that are sent to private schools?
I can't speak to whether there would be accountability or not, but is it written into the amendment? I don't think so. So I don't think there's any language in the amendment that says we have to play by the same rules. So funding is going to go to whichever place, but they may or may not have to play by the same rules of accepting all children, trying to figure things out. And again, personally, fun facts that you may or may not know, but I have a severely, I'm trying to think what the wording would have been back in the 70s, but severely mentally handicapped aunt who was educated in the public system until she was 21. She is probably, in today's terms, should have been diagnosed with autism, was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. She's mute. She uses her hands to communicate. There's a lot of life that has been different for her. I can't imagine if she wasn't able to go to school, what that would have done to my grandparents. And the public school system in good old Carlisle, Kentucky, taught my aunt to count, taught my aunt to read. There's a significant amount of intelligence inside that sometimes just doesn't come out because of communication disorders. So I have a hard time personally with the idea that we would dismiss anyone from learning, because you may not learn everything there is to learn, but everybody can learn something.
Barbara, you asked if there was an advantage, and yeah, there is. If I'm an out-of-state million and multimillionaire looking for an investment, I'll come to Kentucky and I'll start a widget factory. I'll employ people and I'll make widgets. And the state won't give me any money because I'm a businessman. And I rise or fall on how many widgets I can sell. But if I start a school and I don't have to have any qualifications for doing so, I'll start a school. The state will give me money. It's a gold mine. And I don't have to answer really to anybody about anything. And if for some reason it goes belly up, I close the school and leave.
That's if they pass amendment two.
Right.
Yeah, and to that end, we are struggling right now to find educators who are qualified because teaching is hard. It's a hard field.
On your comment on homeschooling, I think, I don't know, I don't have kids, but if I could have been guaranteed that I would have had the 2 daughters that my ex-business partner had and were homeschooled up to freshman year, I would have rethought that, because they're just tremendous people. But they grew up they went through the Arizona and Colorado systems where they are regulated.
Yes.
And the mother was she had a college degree, but she's a full-time stay-at-home mom. And until they got to 9th grade, then they sent them to high school in Minnesota to socialize.
Yes.
And they were always parts of sports teams and stuff. It was done properly. It can be done. Does it happen a lot? I don't think so.
And I think that's probably better said than I said it. We have a handful of families. I can think of one right now that rock star homeschool, K-8. And if they listened to me earlier, I would feel like I let them down. I know there are great homeschools, and again, I think there's a place for everybody, but I think there are people pushing the letter of the law because there's not as much regulation? Absolutely.
Well, and on the same note,
Profit.
I don't have kids, but I pay property taxes. 75% of my property tax goes to school. Well, I don't have kids, why should I pay? Because it behooves me to live in an educated society. And, you know, and the other interesting point you made was the presence of the internet and handheld devices. I have 2 degrees, one class of '84, one class of '19. It's a difference of night and day.
Yes.
My God, the first time, it took me all day to register,
Yes.
and I had no guarantee I got the classes.
Yes.
And then I had to spend all this time in the library. I had to go get the books. I research information. It was a pain in the ass. My 2019 degree, if I need information on Immanuel Kant's second antinomy, I just type it, there it is. You know, before I used to take exams and blue books, I'd handwrite everything. Now it's so much easier, but I had the experience of when it was not to apply to use the tools properly now that it is. And I blew through that course. I got out of George Mason I got out of high school with a 2.0, Mason with a 3.0, and University of New Orleans with a 4.0. And it's all attitude and the ability to use resources at your disposal.
And I think that's the key. It's what you do with the resources that you have. And for those of us, and I call it a privilege, but for those of us that had the privilege to watch the shift
Really.
in the internet and the phone-based community, it's great and wonderful to get information at your fingertips because you have some skill and some knowledge of how to handle it. If you were just, and I'm going to use my 5-year-old as an example, at 2, she took my iPhone and swiped right. And figured out that you can turn it on. And very quickly, because the designers of said devices want it to be stimulating for your brain, very quickly could maneuver, found the camera, can take pictures of herself. And that's in a home where I really do try to pay attention, right? If we're somewhere where we're just handed the device, and we blindly stumble upon pictures and images and information that our brain is not ready for, I think it creates a different scene in our communities, and that's what we're experiencing. Yes, ma'am.
I have a friend who had this in Michigan. She's a teacher in Michigan. And it's like 20 years ago, and it failed. The school choice failed, and rural schools had to close. Do you anticipate any of the rural schools closing because if this passes?
Again, it's going to have to depend on what happens to that funding, but again, going back to personal experience, my father started in Robertson County. It's the smallest county in the state of Kentucky, and some odd 30 years ago, they were considering combining with neighboring schools because they didn't have enough funding at that point in time. So I can't speak directly for Robertson County anymore, but I wonder what would happen. Would they have to consolidate and move and combine with the neighboring county? I don't know, but I think that's a possibility. That I would think that a significant chunk cut from funding would make it hard to operate.
Close schools.
I think, it could. I'd have to look at everybody's individual situation, but if it's going to cut us $10 million, I can't imagine what would happen to a rural school, and that, you know,
You
you're.
may not have the answer to this, but who are the people that actually think this is a good thing?
I can foresee if I am paying for my child to attend a parochial institution, and I am required to pay $10,000-$15,000 in tuition. I would love the opportunity for some of my state tax dollars to discount me or reimburse me for the amount of money that I'm already paying.
That makes sense.
I can appreciate that.
And Jeff,
Kentucky Lantern reported today that Jeff Haas, Pennsylvania billionaire, is contributing $5 million to the passage of Amendment 2.
That's my question.
$5 million. He's associated with Senator Rand Paul and has contributed to Paul's PAC, I believe.
Yeah,
But yeah, Tom Loftus wrote an article in this morning's Land.
That's a big
might want to go up to the mics so that this can be sure to be picked
I will share the mic. No, I can say that based on personal experience from family around various geographical locations in Kentucky, the flyers that are being sent to homes in promotion of Yes, I think are preying on ignorance of what it might do to public education. It's and preying on it's a choice. And yes, it is a choice. But it has consequences for that choice that I don't know that are being communicated or that people understand.
So there are people who would like to send their kids to private school, can't really afford it. Now, if this passes, they say, ooh, now I can send my child to Capital Day. Is that right?
I think you get, honestly, I think Capital Day is an outstanding place, and I think if you want to go to Capital Day, they'd take you. If you want to pay the, well, I don't want to speak directly for them, but I think there's a handful of scholarships that each one of our private institutions have. I can, again, speak to a history piece. I was at Winburn Middle School in Fayette County. It is high poverty. The average parents were 30 years below. And we would have a handful of kids from our middle school every year that would go to Lexington Catholic or Lexington Christian on a scholarship. So I do believe our private schools are trying to help and share the wealth.
About voters. Are voters thinking, oh, this is great.
Oh,
now,
possibly,
and
yes.
they'll get votes because I can't afford it, but now the state's going to help me get my kid to the private school.
And my articulation with that would be the state amount is, again, I'm going to say roughly 4, even if you want to be generous and round to 5. Most tuitions are at least 10.
Yes.
So it's only going to get you part of the way there. It's not going to get you all the way.
Say again what you said.
Yeah.
Let me get you on.
Yeah.
Let me
In the Kentucky Lantern that Jamie Luke is the editor of, former editorial director of the Herald Leader, she reported that Jeff Haas, a billionaire from Pennsylvania, is contributing $5 million for the passage of Amendment 2. And he has contributed in the past to a PAC of Senator Rand Paul. The complete article shows that there's a real funding imbalance. There's another PAC that has contributed between $2 and $3 million. So you're up at that point to $8 million, and I don't know the other funding sources.
Sorry.
But then apparently the teachers' unions have contributed maybe $2 million. So you know, the rich folks are seeing, just like I think it was Bill mentioned, or Jeff, there was an opportunity here for rich folks to take over education, make a lot of money here in Kentucky. Jeff Yass, Y-A-S-S.
Sorry. I think it'd be helpful to the audience.
This is just a general economics question and concerning schools. Is there been a stratification of a greater stratification between people with wealth and poor families in our schools? And is there a flight of wealthy people away from public education?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it really comes down to the satisfaction of the schools in your area. I think people are choosing to go to school where they can and where they want to. I think our bigger cities have some scenarios. Jefferson County had to bus kids across town and that kind of thing. And last year their transportation has just seen some difficult press, and perhaps I'm going to say we made some mistakes, maybe because of technology, but we didn't do it the old-fashioned way. But I don't see a lot of move based on economics. I see more change in enrollment around apathy and avoidance of a situation. My kid, and I despise the word bullying because I think it's overused. Do I think bullies exist? Absolutely. But do I think that in times peer mediation or peer conflict where I disagree with you and you disagree with me and we tear a piece of paper in half, I don't think that's bullying. I think that's learning how to work with others. But we're finding that one side, two side, our resiliency and our grit is not the same. And so if anybody says something that hurts my feelings, I go home. And I may stay home for 2 or 3 weeks, and then I come back to school.
Not much has changed, because in 1967, in seventh grade, if I got home, literally, if I got home without being humiliated or beaten, that was a good day. And I was in that school for 2 years. And by the time I got to high school, they didn't really matter because they're just going to send us to Vietnam, you know. But it was very different. 3,200 people in my high school, 720 in my graduating class. But outside, I'm trying to think of private schools in the D.C. area. I'm sure they must have been there, but the only ones I knew of were Montessori and the military academies. You know, that was, we didn't have an issue like that.
I think your point about education becoming a business model is accurate, and I think there's concerns that could happen. And again, if you don't have to play by the same rules as the public education sector, the way you market your school can be very different. The people in the room educating the students can be very different. Do I think things need to change in education in some areas? Absolutely, as always. I don't know how you do more with less, and I think that's what Amendment 2 is ultimately about. It's about the funding, and I know we will not be able to do the same things we are currently doing.
I have some comment I'd like to make.
Yes.
My name is William Averill. I came out here tonight to find out about this mysterious Amendment 2 and what it all entails. And based on what I am looking at on the board and hearing the comments, I think what I would call this is something that comes out of my public administration background and education and work experience with the state. A very poor, dismal example of what they want to call the shortcut for social change and improvement. And I really think that while I have been mostly, in my own experience, I was educated in private schools, and I raised a son in a private education at the Sayers School in Lexington primarily. He and I both, throughout the course of our education, attended both public and private school, and being a parent, as well as being privately and publicly educated myself, I went to boarding school in Pennsylvania, a graduate of Center College, but I did my master's at the University of Tennessee, and I also went to the local public high school here in Frankfort. And when I saw Amendment number 2 on the posters and in the papers and the articles for and against, good and bad reasoning. It just occurs to me that this amendment really, in order to be viable and make sense and do justice to the county and the school here, Franklin County, you've used for illustrating the situation. Why can't the private schools and the public come together, and instead of taking money out of 12% and cutting jobs and losing funding, don't they come to try to improve and identify the issues in the public education and use some of the teaching methods or faculty, or come full sway whereby there is a partnership created between the schools where people are taking their voucher and coming to join and having learning programs and finding out such things as, okay, the public school doesn't offer a certain line of teaching in math or science, the STEM principle, which was a new thing. And if there is to be a release of money to the private school, that private school would perhaps offer a better course or an advanced course in mathematics and biology, that, not singling out Franklin County, but any public school in the community doesn't have the funds or the faculty themselves to teach. I think that would be a far better way, far less cheaper, and this is just simply a wholesale slaughter of a good school in the public sector, being told by somebody who's a parent who has neither the training or the education to make a well-informed opinion or assessment of how much better off educated their children will be in a private school. It's just a voucher, a given price tag, and the only thing that the public school knows is we're down 12%, and these people who are depending on being able to live a 20-year career or thereabouts teaching and have a retirement at the end are just simply cut off in this radical change to put somebody's child into the private school. I'm all in favor of private education. In fact, I will have to say I'm somewhat biased just because of my experience, and there are goods and bads and pros and cons about either one. But I do think that this whole scheme has just been a mismanagement of regulatory process, and this Amendment 2 probably should not have even been put on the ballot without all of the underpinning of more careful analysis by both the system and in the fact that the percentage of counties doesn't really have that many private schools, it's going to impact Franklin County differently from Ballard County, from other places that may never have to undergo this change, this metamorphosis, if you will, depending on the relative regression that is coming about, or apparently is just almost like an overnight shortcut for social change, and there's nothing more done to really lay out the issue, provide the information, and keep all parties involved, the school children, the child especially, the teacher, the staff member at both places. In other words, I think they should have really gotten together on this before they launched to just put it on the ballot.
I understand that completely.
Thank you
Yeah.
for hearing me out.
Absolutely.
Let him go. Okay, to me, and I'm not learned about this, I don't have a dog in the fight, I don't have kids, I believe in choice, and I think that's wonderful. But Lewis, right? Ernie, I'm sorry. As Ernie mentioned, there's people from out of state that are doing this. And if anybody wants to look at Progress Kentucky's Kernel of Truth program on October 4th, Josh Cowan was the speaker, and he wrote a book called How Billionaires Created a Culture War and Sold School Vouchers. And my thing is, and I hope it's not too indelicate to talk about, but these folks that are, these PACs that are out there that are influencing all of this, I think are really coming here or wanting it to happen so they can indoctrinate kids into being whatever kind of nationalist conservative. I don't have all the correct lingo, but that I think is the elephant in the room and what the public really needs to know about. I think it's great. Yeah, kids need to be able to go to private school. That's good. But who's bankrolling this and what are their intentions?
It could be not just about money, it could be about the chosen curriculum.
Where I went to high school, we had a lot of high schools, obviously. And they took one, Jefferson, and they switched it over to a magnet school for precisely what this gentleman was talking about. Courses that they would probably call them preparatory courses now, but they were courses advanced in logic and computers and in their STEM, mathematics, calculus, things that you wouldn't normally teach in high school. You had to qualify to go there, but it was still public. But we were the 8th richest county in the United States, so we had the resources to do that kind of thing, so we did it. But it's I mean, there's you don't have to have a private school to do it. You can do it another way, but you have to have the resources, and I don't think the state of Kentucky has that.
Well, Fayette County has those kind of schools.
Well, it's been a very interesting discussion, and I'm sure Whitney's getting tired of standing there.
No, it's all right.
You have done a magnificent job in addressing
you.
this issue and all the other issues along with it.
Well,
Go ahead.
I appreciate the opportunity to educate, and I never profess to be the expert, but certainly, knowing what happens day to day, certainly I'm always willing to come and speak on my perspective, and wish us all well as we consider these issues.
Thank you very much. You really did a good job. I'm going to close it then. You can have a few minutes for discussion. We usually try to be out of here by 8 o'clock. And our next forum will be on housing. affordable housing, homeless problems. That will be the third Thursday of November, which I think is the 21st, but I'm not positive. But we'll be sending out notices about that because that's a whole new issue. Get her a minute. Give her a bit.
If anyone here is new or hasn't familiar with Together Frankfort, we do have a membership. We would like you to join our membership for Together Frankfort, and it's $25, right? Is that right? A year. $25 a year, yeah. Yeah. And but you know, the things we do cost a little bit of money, so if you like what you see, if you like what you hear, you know, please help us out.